deepest folds of the Appalachian Mountains, there are places locals refuse to map, valleys where even the bravest hunters will not tread. One such place is known only as Black Hollow, a narrow valley choked with twisted trees and a silence so heavy it presses against the chest. It is said that once you enter, the air grows wrong, too still, too heavy, too watchful, and at the heart of that hollow lies the story of the Blackwells, a family whose name has become a curse whispered in taverns and passed down through frightened lullabies. The Blackwells arrived in the mid-1700s, part of the earliest waves of settlers who carved their lives into the mountains. But unlike their neighbors, who built cabins in clearings and sought community, the Blackwells plunged into the thickest, darkest part of the wilderness. They were reclusive, secretive, and strange, even by frontier standards. They built their homestead not near rivers or trails, but deep inside Black Hollow, far from prying eyes. From the very beginning, they treated the land not as property, but as something divine. Folklore claims they worshipped what they called the Endless Maw, a spirit of hunger said to reside in the woods. The Blackwells were its chosen vessels. At first, the rituals they performed seemed little more than strange superstitions, leaving offerings of blood on stones, chanting to the forest at night, carving spiral symbols into trees. But hunger, once invited, grows, and soon the sacrifices shifted. Chickens, pigs, and goats weren't enough. Travelers passing through began to disappear. Hunters failed to return. Children went missing on the outskirts of farms. The Blackwells, it was said, had turned to flesh, but they didn't eat out of desperation. They ate out of devotion. To them, consuming human flesh wasn't mere survival. It was communion. They believed each victim fed the Maw, and in return, the Maw made the Blackwells stronger, eternal. Generations of this practice left their mark. By the early 1800s, accounts describe the family as grotesquely altered, pale-skinned, crooked-limbed jaws that jutted unnaturally forward. Their eyes reflected firelight like those of wolves, even in the dark. Children born into the family were rumored to gnaw on raw meat before they could walk. One of the earliest surviving accounts of the Blackwells comes from a preacher named Elias Thornton. In 1824, Thornton gathered a small group of men to march into Black Hollow and root out what he called the Devil's Brood. His journal, later found water-damaged but intact in a church attic, paints a nightmarish picture. He wrote of cabins made from logs blackened by blood, of children crawling on all fours with their mouths stained red, of chants rising from underground caves. He claimed the Blackwells shrieked and laughed as his men tried to set fire to their homes. By dawn, none of Thornton's companions remained alive. The last entry in his journal reads, "They come in silence, and they do not die. God have mercy on us all." Locals took this as a warning. From then on, Black Hollow was avoided. Whole families packed up and moved rather than risk straying too close. The few who remained nearby swore they could see fires flickering on the ridges during moonless nights, hear screams carried on the wind, and smell meat roasting, though no smoke was visible. Over time, trails were abandoned, maps redrawn, and the hollow was erased from common knowledge. But the Blackwells did not live in isolation. They recruited runaways, criminals. The broken and desperate, those who stumbled into Black Hollow, were sometimes welcomed with warmth at first. Food, shelter, fire. Only later did they realize what they were truly eating, what they were becoming part of. By then, escape was impossible. You either fed the Maw, or you fed the clan. The Blackwells grew in number, their rituals darker with each generation. Bones were arranged in patterns across the forest floor. Effigies made of sticks and sinew hung from branches, swaying in the wind. On certain nights, villagers swore they could hear drums echoing from the hollow, followed by screams that cut off too suddenly, as though swallowed. Then came the disappearances that made their legend impossible to ignore. In 1837, An entire wagon train headed west vanished after passing near the hollow. Weeks later, a single wheel was found in a river miles downstream, gnawed as though by teeth. In 1849, a group of traders vanished, and their goods were discovered abandoned in the woods, food untouched but blood staining the earth. And in 1852, 3 children went missing from a farm near the hollow. Only one was ever found months later, alive but wild, his fingernails sharpened to claws, and his teeth broken from biting stone. He muttered a single phrase again and again until his death. The maw feeds. By the mid-19th century, the Blackwells were no longer seen as people. They were predators. They were myth-made flesh. The name alone carried weight, spoken softly and never at night. To outsiders, their existence seemed impossible. But to those who lived in the shadow of the hollow, the Blackwells were real. And so, the Blackwell bloodline persisted, hidden in the woods, worshipping their god of hunger, consuming generation after generation. Each victim fed the maw, each ritual bound the clan tighter to their cursed land. And every year, the hollow grew darker, heavier, hungrier, because the truth is, the Blackwells weren't just living in Black Hollow. They were part of it. By the dawn of the 20th century, the legend of the Blackwells had hardened into something like scripture in Appalachia. Parents warned their children never to wander near Black Hollow. Travelers passing through were given clear instructions. Don't stray off the main roads. Don't follow strange sounds at night. And above all, don't say the Blackwell name out loud after dark. But as the outside world crept closer with railroads, coal camps, and electricity, the Blackwells refused to fade into myth. They adapted. In 1911, a surveying company from Cumberland was tasked with charting land near the hollow for mining rights. They sent 3 hard men, used to the mountains and to danger. They carried rifles, dynamite, and a month's supply of rations. Only one ever returned. He stumbled into town weeks later, clothes shredded, skin torn, and his eyes wild with madness. Between fits of silence and howls, he muttered fragments that chilled listeners to the bone. They eat the living. They eat the dead. The maw watches. Within days, he was dead, having torn open his own throat with his bare hands, as though trying to silence something inside. The other 2 were never seen again. That was only the beginning. As coal companies expanded, so did reports of workers disappearing near the hollow. Authorities often blamed cave-ins or wild animals, but the remains that occasionally surfaced told another story. Bones stripped clean, marrow hollowed, and strange spiral carvings etched into the bone itself. When questioned, officials dismissed the markings as rodent activity. But among locals, the whispers grew louder. The Blackwells were still alive, and still feeding. The 1930s brought one of the most horrifying survivor accounts ever recorded. Clara Mathers, a farm girl from a nearby settlement, vanished with her parents while traveling a ridge path. Weeks later, she was found wandering barefoot and starved miles from home. Her hands bore rope burns, and her eyes carried a hollow, faraway look. When she was coherent enough to speak, she described being dragged into the hollow by pale, crooked figures. She spoke of underground chambers lit by fire, where dozens of Blackwells feasted on raw flesh. She remembered chanting, bones hung like decorations, and children with teeth filed 2 points. Her parents, she claimed, were slaughtered before her eyes and offered to the maw. Clara survived only because she crawled through a drainage tunnel during a storm. For the rest of her life, she was confined to an asylum, where she scratched spirals into her walls and muttered the same phrase, "The maw feeds." By the 1940s, even the government had taken notice. Soldiers on training exercises near Black Hollow reported strange phenomena, rifle fire answered by inhuman shrieks, patrols that vanished without a trace, and bonfires that seemed to vanish the moment anyone approached. Some locals claimed the military made a secret deal with the Blackwells leave them undisturbed, and they would remain contained. Whether truth or rumor, one fact remained: the hollow was never developed, never mined, never mapped. It became a blank space, an area avoided even on official documents. In the 1960s and 70s, the counterculture movement brought a new wave of victims. Hippies, wanderers, and spiritual seekers were drawn to the mountains in search of hidden truths and natural living. Some stumbled too close to Black Hollow. Many never returned. Those who did came back broken. One man, found wandering a road naked and raving, had his tongue crudely sewn back in with animal sinew. On his forearm, burned deep into the flesh, were 3 words: "The maw feeds." By the late 20th century, the Blackwells had become urban legend fodder. Teenagers dared each other to enter the hollow. Journalists attempted exposes, and amateur filmmakers sought the truth. Most found nothing but fear and silence, but a handful uncovered enough to spread the legend further. Hunters reported finding bone altars in trees. Campers described hearing drums echoing at midnight, always followed by the smell of burning meat. A journalist in the 1980s recorded an interview with a trapper who claimed he'd seen Blackwell children crawling on all 4s along a ridge, their faces too wide, their eyes reflecting like animals. The tape ends with the trapper saying, "They ain't people anymore. They ain't been people for a long time." Days later, that journalist disappeared while driving back from the hollow. His car was found abandoned on the roadside. The tape recorder was in the front seat. The tape was missing. The Blackwells had perfected their survival. They didn't just rely on secrecy, they thrived on fear. Every whispered story, every missing person, every warning from a trembling elder only strengthened their legend. And the legend was as much a weapon as their teeth. Because the truth was simple: the more people believed, the less likely they were to fight back. And so, generation after generation, the Blackwell clan endured. They became not just flesh and blood, but a living embodiment of the endless maw, itself consuming, thriving, and waiting in the dark, by the dawn of the 21st century. The world outside Appalachia had changed. Cities had risen, technology had woven itself into every corner of life, and the mountains were no longer as isolated as they once were. But Black Hollow remained untouched, a scar of wilderness that locals still avoided. No cell service worked there, no GPS signal held steady, and even drones sent into its ridges were said to crash inexplicably. It was as though the hollow itself rejected intrusion. But technology also meant curiosity multiplied. Paranormal investigators, YouTubers, and amateur cryptid hunters began to descend on Appalachia, drawn by whispers of the Blackwell clan. And it wasn't long before the stories started again. In 2003, a group of college students from Ohio uploaded grainy footage of their expedition into Black Hollow. The video begins with laughter, flashlights cutting through thick fog, and the excitement of discovery. But, halfway through, the tone shifts. Strange knocking sounds echo through the trees. Their camera catches what looks like a child darting between trunks, unnaturally fast, pale against the darkness. The final minute shows the group running, breathless, whispering prayers. Then the camera falls, tilting sideways in the dirt. For a moment, a face looms into the frame, elongated, too many teeth, and eyes glinting with a hungry intelligence. Then the tape ends. The students were reported missing. Their bodies were never recovered. The footage disappeared from the internet within weeks, though fragments still surface in obscure corners of forums. In 2011, a pair of hunters from Kentucky entered the hollow after rumors of oversized deer. They returned with nothing but horror. One man never spoke again, reduced to silence and tremors. The other described stumbling into a pit lined with bones, human bones arranged in spirals and circles. He swore he heard voices chanting in the trees, though no one else was present. When asked what language it was, he shook his head and said, "It wasn't words, it was hunger." But perhaps the most disturbing account came in 2017, when hikers reported screams near the hollow that lasted for hours. When rescue teams investigated, they found a shredded tent, still warm campfire, and a trail of blood leading into the woods. They followed it for half a mile before it simply vanished. No body, no prints, no explanation. The case was quietly closed. As modern investigators pressed further, a clearer picture of the Blackwell legacy emerged. They weren't just a clan of inbred cannibals hiding in the hills. They were something far darker. Generations of isolation and blood rituals had reshaped them, twisting their bodies and minds into something barely human. Their bones were denser, their teeth sharper, their senses heightened. They thrived in the dark, moving with impossible silence. Some researchers even suggested they had bred themselves into a kind of predator perfectly adapted to their environment. But others whispered a more chilling truth, that they were no longer entirely human at all, because everywhere the Blackwells left their mark, there were signs of something larger. The spirals carved into bone, the chanting that wasn't quite language, the endless references to the maw. Survivors spoke of a darkness beneath the hollow, a pit that breathed, a hunger that was more than just metaphor. The Blackwells, it seemed, weren't just feeding themselves. They were feeding something else. The most compelling evidence surfaced in 2020, when an urban explorer live-streamed his attempt to enter the hollow. Thousands watched in real time as he joked, stumbled, and pushed deeper into the mist. Then the mood shifted. Strange shapes moved behind him. His viewers flooded the chat, warning him to turn back. But he pressed on, laughing nervously. Suddenly, the sound of bones cracking echoed through the stream. His camera swung wildly, and for a split second, watchers swore they saw dozens of pale figures crouched in the trees, their heads turning in unison. The stream cut out. His account was deleted hours later. The young man was never found, and yet, locals aren't surprised. They say the Blackwells endure because they are not just a family, they are a curse. A bloodline bound to something deeper than human hunger. Some even believe the maw is real, a living abyss that waits beneath Black Hollow, fed by centuries of flesh and fear. Whether the Blackwells serve it willingly, or are themselves its prisoners, is a question no one dares answer. What is certain is this: the Blackwells have not vanished. To this day, hikers go missing, hunters never return, and strange fires burn on the ridges at night. If you stand too close to Black Hollow after dark, you might hear drums, you might hear laughter, or worse, you might hear nothing at all, just the sound of your own heartbeat, until something steps out of the trees, smiling with too many teeth. The Blackwells are waiting, and the maw still feeds. Asterisk if you thought the legend of the Blackwells was the most horrifying tale hidden in Appalachia, you might want to think again, because the mountains are filled with stories, even darker families, even more twisted, secrets, even more grotesque, and trust me, you haven't heard the worst of them yet. So, if you want to keep descending deeper into these forgotten horrors, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that bell so you don't miss what's coming next, because the next story may just be the one that keeps you awake at night. Tell me, would you dare set foot anywhere near Black Hollow after hearing this? Or do you think the Blackwells are just a story to keep outsiders away? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I'm curious who among you would actually take that risk. Until next time, remember, in the dark corners of Appalachia, the maw always feeds.